Hello, my name is Mike Mahon, and I would like to show you how I prepare a limited palette for painting outdoors or in plein air in oil. But before I do that, let me mention a few of the reasons that a limited palette can be so useful. First of all, you learn a lot more about color mixing and color theory when you mix all your colors with a few primary colors. It also improves color harmony and consistency throughout the painting, as well as throughout a series of paintings. It saves you a lot of money. Instead of buying 20 or 30 tubes of paint, you only need about 5 for a typical plein air setting. Now, especially for plein air painters, you save a lot of weight instead of carrying so many tubes of paint with you. The next thing is it saves a lot of space in your kit, as well as it saves a lot of space on your palette because you have fewer colors that you're mixing. And most importantly, it saves you time, especially if you follow the pre-mixing procedure that I use before going into the field. So let's get to painting and let's get to mixing some colors. Now let's prepare our palette for a limited palette for painting either outdoors or indoors, but particularly outdoors. We're going to use a primary colors of alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow light, and ultramarine blue, and then we're going to mix some intermediate colors. But first, let me put my colors out there in a big enough glob of color so I have plenty to work with. You're going to be using these colors to mix your other colors, so you want to have plenty to mix with. Okay, that'll be enough to start with. Before I start mixing the colors though, I just want to discuss the palette knives. I recommend a small palette knife, something along these lines, or even a smaller palette knife, which these are nice because they're just one piece of steel. But you want to have a high quality palette knife, not the little cheap plastic ones. A good metal, good thin palette knife so you can pick up your paints well. So I'm going to start out by mixing my intermediate colors. And the first one is going to be the intermediate between the alizarin crimson and the yellow. And I take an equal amount of alizarin crimson and I wipe my palette knife before I get into the yellow, and I get about an equal amount of yellow, and I mix those together, and I'm going to get a nice orange, a step between the yellow and the alizarin crimson. I want to mix it real well. See, your nice sharp palette knife picks up the colors better than big fat ones. We're going to put that right in there between those two colors. Then before I do any more mixing, I'm going to wipe off that paint. And now I'm going to mix an intermediate green. First of all, though, I want to clean off the surface I'm working with. And then I take a good glob of yellow. Wipe it off. Take about an equal amount of the blue. And now I'm going to mix my green. You want to do all of this mixing as much as possible before you get into the field, because when you're in the field, it's much more difficult to work. And you don't want to waste your time mixing any more colors than you absolutely have to in the field. You want to try to do those preferably before you get in the field at all, or certainly before you set up to paint. Now I'm going to mix another color, which is going to be a purple, and this is going to be intermediate. Well, first of all, let me clean this off. Keep a clean palette. I'm going to mix a purple, About an equal amount of alizarin crimson and the ultramarine blue. Well, you can see now why I have to put in a lot of those primary colors, because I'm going to be doing a lot of mixing. You can usually use a little bit more ultramarine blue than the alizarin crimson, because the alizarin crimson is a very, very strong color. It mixes very strong. It doesn't take as much to mix with it. But here we got a nice purple, which you can't see. Right now, it looks almost black, probably. And which reminds me that I want to mix even more of that than I would normally, which I will explain in a minute. So I'm going to take another big glob of alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, because I want to have a lot of that particular color, and you'll see why in just a moment. I'm working on glass over cardboard, over just regular corrugated cardboard, which gives me a nice, fairly neutral, not a gray, but a neutral, warm color, and about a 50% value, so I can see my colors. And this is about the value I tone my canvases, and the color even, so that when I mix on it, it's whatever color I mix here on the palette looks the same when I put it up on my canvas. Okay, now I'm going to take a glob of that, put it up there. That's my purple over there. Now I'm going to take this very dark violet, and I'm going to use it to make a black. The alizarin crimson and the ultramarine blue make a very nice black, but I want it to be a very neutral black. So I can tell just by looking at it, by smashing it around, that that's a pretty red violet. So I'm going to add some blue to it. In fact, I'm going to add a lot of blue to it to help balance it out, so it's not quite so alizarin crimson, not quite so warm. Now I can spread it out a little bit and kind of get an idea. Yeah, it's not nearly as red now, but see it now, it looks like it's nice purple, a little bit more of a blue purple. Now, it looks very black right now, and it is virtually black, but to really get a nice neutral black, I'm going to add a little green to it. Now that's going to give me a little bit more neutral tone. And one way to test out to see how neutral it is to take a very small amount of it. By the way, I normally put my white out about this time. I don't put it out any sooner than I absolutely need it. Now I can take just a little bit of that white, just a tiny bit, and spread it on there and see what kind of gray I get. Let's see what kind of... Now I'm still getting fairly purplish gray. I want to neutralize that a little bit, so I'm going to add a little bit more green to it. You'll see in a minute why I'm going to all this trouble to get a nice neutral black. You may ask, why mix all this trouble going to mix a black when you can just squeeze one out of a tube? Well, that's another tube you have to carry around. I don't normally use much black when I'm painting, but particularly with black, it's such a dead color that when you mix it, rather than get it out of a tube, it has a little bit more life to it. It's not so dead. Okay, now I take this black and I put it up here on the left side, on the same side as I have my white. Now I've mixed my colors, my primaries, and get my intermediates. Now I've mixed a black. Now the next step is I'm going to mix some intermediate grays over here, and I'll explain why we do this here in a minute. I'm going to mix a middle tone by taking about a quarter or more of this black. I'm going to be using this mixture, this black with some white, to mix a nice neutral gray. Okay. Let's get that white and black in there. Okay, now we got a nice, fairly neutral gray, and by mixing those about equal amounts between the white and the black, I get something that's not too far in value from this this value right here, which is about a 50% gray. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it halfway between the black and the white. Okay, now I want to mix a step between the white and the middle tone gray to get a middle value here. This is about 50% gray. This is, of course, a black. This is white. So I'm going to take about half of that gray and add an equal amount of white to it. Okay, that's about halfway between that white and the middle tone gray. Okay, now I'm going to take a good wad of this middle tone gray, and I'm going to mix it with my black, and should get a step that's reasonably close to about 75% value black. Okay, now what I have here are 5 steps of gray from black to white. These 5 steps start out white, about a 25% gray, 50% gray, 75% gray, and 100% black. Or you can call it 100% gray if you want. Okay, I'm going to clean that off. Now, this is my basic palette that I'm going to work with when I'm painting. I have 6 colors across here, 3 of which were primary colors that I mixed to get the others, and then steps of gray.